downtown Chicago, where the streets show the harshest realities of injustice. The city is alive with movement, but for some, the streets are not just a place to pass through. They are home. A homeless boy is pushed down, humiliated, and threatened by a cop. But what happens next will leave everyone speechless. 11-year-old Malik Lewis has been living on the streets since he lost his mother. He knows hunger, cold, and the feeling of being invisible. Each day is a fight for survival, but he refuses to give up. Surviving on scraps, he finds refuge near an abandoned storefront. The brick walls offer a small barrier against the wind, and the vent nearby blows out just enough warm air to keep him from freezing. One cold evening, as he warms his hands near a vent, police sirens wail. The sound makes his stomach twist. He knows what's coming. Officer Daniels, known for harassing the homeless, steps out of his patrol car. His boots hit the pavement with force, his presence casting a shadow over Malik's small frame. "Get up, dirty black. You're ruining my city." Malik barely has time to react before he's shoved to the ground. His palms scrape against the rough sidewalk, a sharp sting shooting up his arms. He doesn't cry out. He's learned that showing pain only makes it worse. The street is quiet, bystanders pretending not to see. The world moves on, unaware or unwilling to intervene. The cold seeps through his thin jacket, his fingers trembling as he grips the concrete. He wants to push himself up, to run, but he knows better. Running makes it worse. Running makes them chase. Daniel stands over him, his breath visible in the night air. The officer's hand lingers near his holster, a silent warning. I said, "Get up." Malik moves slowly, every muscle in his body tense. He doesn't look up. Looking up means eye contact, and eye contact means trouble. His heartbeat pounds in his ears, drowning out the city noise. Have you ever witnessed injustice firsthand? Share your story. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Daniels grips Malik's arm, pulling him roughly to his feet. The force of the movement sends a sharp pain through Malik's shoulder, but he doesn't cry out. He has learned that showing pain only invites more cruelty. "You're nothing but a street rat. People like you don't belong here," Daniels sneers, his grip tightening. Malik swallows hard, his voice shaking. "I'm just trying to survive." Instead of compassion, the officer smirks. "Not my problem." The street remains silent. Bystanders shuffle past, their heads down, pretending not to see. It is easier that way, to walk away, to ignore the suffering right in front of them. A few feet away, an older woman named Mrs. Jenkins watches in horror. Her wrinkled hands tremble as she clutches her grocery bag, her eyes narrowing in disgust at the scene unfolding before her. "Leave that boy alone," she shouts, stepping forward. Daniels barely acknowledges her at first, his focus locked on Malik. He enjoys this, the power, the fear in the boy's eyes. But when Mrs. Jenkins pulls out her phone and starts recording, his smirk falters. "I said, leave him alone," she repeats, her voice stronger now, shaking with fury. The street is no longer as quiet. Others begin to slow their pace, glancing toward the confrontation. A few pull out their own phones, recording from different angles. Daniel's grip on Malik loosens slightly, but the hostility in his eyes remains. He shifts uncomfortably, noticing more people stopping to watch. A man in a business suit frowns, pulling out his own phone. A young woman across the street hesitates before stepping closer. Malik's heart pounds in his chest. He knows how this usually ends. But this time, there is something different, something he hasn't felt before. Daniels exhales sharply, his jaw tightening. "Mind your business, lady," he snaps at Mrs. Jenkins. This kid doesn't belong here. Mrs. Jenkins doesn't flinch. And neither do you, abusing your badge like that. More murmurs spread through the crowd. Someone whispers, "Is he really going after a kid?" Another voice mutters, "This isn't right." Daniel's posture stiffens. His gaze flickers from Malik to the growing number of phones pointed in his direction. He takes a step back, his grip finally releasing. Malik stumbles slightly, regaining his balance. His body aches, but he stays upright, his breathing unsteady. Mrs. Jenkins moves closer, standing between him and Daniels. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she says, her voice filled with conviction. "This boy deserves better. Would you step in if you saw something like this happening? Let's discuss." Mrs. Jenkins grips her phone tightly, recording every second of the abuse. Her hands tremble with anger, but her voice is steady as she shouts, "You don't get to treat people like trash just because you wear a badge." Officer Daniels freezes, his body tensing. For the first time, the weight of the moment catches up with him. His eyes flick to the phone in her hand, then to the growing number of bystanders now holding up their own phones, capturing everything. The confidence that once filled him starts to waver. His grip on Malik loosens, but not before he gives the boy one final shove. Malik stumbles back, his thin frame barely able to absorb the impact. The pain radiates through his body, but he refuses to fall. Daniels clenches his jaw. He scans the crowd, searching for an escape from the unwanted attention. He knows what happens when videos like this go viral. He knows his actions are no longer just words against a boy with no home. Without another word, he storms off, his boots slamming against the pavement as he heads for his patrol car. He yanks the door open, slams it shut, and speeds away, tires screeching against the asphalt. The tension lingers even after he's gone. The air is thick with the weight of what just happened. The crowd murmurs, eyes darting from Malik to Mrs. Jenkins, then back to their phones, their screens still recording. Mrs. Jenkins wastes no time. With swift fingers, she uploads the video to social media. The caption is simple but powerful. "This is what happens in our city. This is what happens when no one is watching. But today, we watched." Within hours, the video spreads like wildfire. People across the country share it, outraged at the injustice they see. News outlets pick it up. Hashtags flood timelines. Justice for Malik trends nationwide. Comments flood in from people demanding accountability. Activists amplify the footage, calling for an official investigation into Officer Daniels. The mayor releases a statement, acknowledging the growing outrage and promising that the incident will be reviewed. Malik watches the events unfold from a small cafe, where Mrs. Jenkins has taken him for a warm meal. The reality of the situation still hasn't fully sunk in. He had spent so long feeling invisible, only to now have the world speaking his name. Mrs. Jenkins pats his hand reassuringly. "They see you now, child, and they're not going to let this go." For the first time in a long time, Malik feels something foreign. Hope. Do you think social media helps expose injustice? Drop your thoughts below. By morning, the mayor's office issues a statement. "We are launching an investigation." The words spread quickly across news outlets and social media, fueling the fire of public outrage. The city, once indifferent to Malik's suffering, is now paying attention. Malik, exhausted and scared, is taken in by a local shelter. The bed is small, but it's warm. The meals are simple, but they are more than he has had in days. Mrs. Jenkins stays by his side, ensuring he is safe, ensuring he is seen. But even in the quiet of the shelter, he knows the battle isn't over. The video reaches national news. Anchor after anchor discusses the footage, dissecting every second. "How many more times must we see this?" one commentator demands. "This officer must be held accountable." Protesters chant outside the police station. The crowd grows by the hour, signs held high, voices echoing in the streets. The police department remains silent at first, hoping the outrage will fade. But the world is watching. Under immense pressure, Officer Daniels is suspended pending an investigation. It is not enough, not yet, but it is a start. Malik watches the protests unfold from the shelter's common area, the television buzzing with updates. His name is being spoken in places he never imagined. Strangers fight for him, demand justice for him. He is no longer invisible. Mrs. Jenkins sits beside him, her hand warm over his own. "They won't stop fighting, baby, and neither will we." The shelter staff speaks in hushed voices as they discuss the growing movement. Volunteers arrive with donations, offering clothes, food, and supplies for Malik and other children in need. The shelter director assures him that he is safe. But Malik knows that safety is never guaranteed, not when the world has shown him otherwise. Outside the police station, the crowd intensifies. Reporters capture every moment as chants grow louder. Activists and community leaders take the stage, demanding not just an investigation, but real consequences. "Suspension is not justice," one speaker calls out. "This is not accountability." The mayor's office, now fully aware of the unrest, releases a second statement. "We hear the concerns of our citizens and will ensure this matter is handled with full transparency." But the people are not satisfied with words. They want action. Officer Daniels, now hidden from public view, faces mounting scrutiny. Internal Affairs begins questioning his record, his history of complaints, his unchecked authority. The weight of his actions now threatens to crush the power he once wielded so easily. Malik listens to the updates, his fingers tracing the edge of his blanket. He wonders if this moment will truly change anything, if his suffering will lead to something greater than just a headline. Mrs. Jenkins looks at him with knowing eyes. "They see you now," she reminds him, "and they won't forget." Should corrupt cops face harsher punishments? Let's talk. A few days later, a wealthy businessman named Jordan Whitmore sits in his office, watching the footage on his large screen. The video of Malik's abuse has been playing on every major news channel, but something about the boy's resilience tugs at him in a way he can't ignore. That boy. He has no home, no family. He asks his assistant, his brow furrowed. The assistant shakes her head. "No, sir. He's been living on the streets since his mother passed away. Right now, he's at a shelter." Whitmore exhales slowly, tapping his fingers against his desk. He has built his empire by making decisive moves, and today is no different. He won't just stand by and watch. The next morning, a sleek black SUV pulls up outside the shelter. The vehicle stands out among the older cars and worn-down surroundings. People glance at it curiously, wondering who could possibly be visiting a place like this. Inside, Malik finishes his breakfast, still adjusting to life within the shelter's walls. When a staff member calls his name, he hesitates before stepping outside, squinting at the bright morning sun. A tall man in an expensive suit approaches him. His presence is commanding, yet there's warmth in his eyes. "Malik," he says with a nod. "I saw what happened to you, son, and I want to help." Malik shifts uncomfortably, glancing back toward the shelter door. Mrs. Jenkins stands nearby, watching protectively. Whitmore reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out an envelope. He hands it to Malik, who hesitantly takes it. Inside, he finds documents, papers for a scholarship, a place to stay, a second chance. "I don't want anything in return," Whitmore assures him. "I just believe in giving people the opportunities they deserve." Malik swallows hard, staring at the papers in his hands. A mixture of emotions swirls inside him: hope, fear, doubt. He has never been offered something like this before, not without a catch. Mrs. Jenkins steps forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's your choice, baby, but maybe this is the break you've been waiting for." Malik takes a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the envelope. The world has been cruel to him for so long. Could he trust this stranger's kindness? Would you accept help from a stranger? Why or why not? Let's discuss. After weeks of relentless public pressure, the moment finally arrives. Officer Daniels is arrested for assault and misconduct. The video, now seen by millions, has left no room for denial. The people demanded justice, and this time, the system could not ignore them. The police department, facing scrutiny from every direction, releases a statement. "We acknowledge the failures in handling this situation and are committed to change. Effective immediately, we are enacting reforms for how officers interact with the homeless community." Malik, once just a boy struggling to survive, is now a symbol of resilience. The world sees him differently now, not as an invisible child on the streets, but as someone whose voice could no longer be silenced. His story has reached every corner of the country, sparking conversations about accountability, justice, and the treatment of those society so often neglects. At a press conference, Malik stands beside Jordan Whitmore. Dressed in clothes that finally fit him, standing taller than before, he speaks into the microphone, his voice steady. "No one deserves to be treated like they don't matter. People like me, we exist. We deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be treated like human beings." The crowd listens in silence, absorbing his words. Mrs. Jenkins, standing in the front row, wipes a tear from her eye, pride radiating from her. Meanwhile, in a crowded courtroom, Officer Daniels sits with his head down, the weight of his actions finally pressing upon him. His arrogance is gone, replaced by the cold reality of consequence. The judge reads the charges aloud, and the room watches as he is led away in handcuffs. Justice, for once, is not just a word. Outside, the people who fought for Malik celebrate. The movement didn't just win one battle, it forced a system to acknowledge the truth. Malik watches the celebration from a distance, unsure of how to feel. His life has changed in ways he never expected. He has a place to stay, a future that seems less uncertain, but the scars of his past remain. He wonders if people will remember his story when the next crisis comes, or if they will move on, forgetting the fight that brought him here. The shelter staff watches him carefully, aware of the weight he carries. Mrs. Jenkins sits beside him, her warmth unwavering. "You changed something, child," she says softly. "No one can take that away." Malik nods, letting her words sink in. He doesn't know what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, he believes that maybe, just maybe, things can get better. "Do you believe justice was served? Let's talk."